Greetings. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Today's talk focuses on three areas. The first, the first item that we're covering is Tesla Semi not enough electricity. The second issue we're covering is Goldman Sachs says Tesla needs $10 billion. And the third issue we're covering today is that Daimler/Mercedes owners are saying no to carrying EVs. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is the first time on your channel, welcome. For those of you returning, welcome back. Please note we do put a couple of ads in. We'd appreciate it if you'd watch 5 or 10 seconds of it because it really helps us grow as a channel. We also have a Patreon link if you'd like to support with $1 or $2 on a monthly basis. Would be greatly appreciated to help us improve the quality of our equipment. Today's show is from a place called Potomac, Maryland. You saw the beautiful gardens behind us. I may include more footage at the end, but we do a little bit of travel to sort of pick up different views in the Washington, D.C. area. So the first of our talk focuses on the whole question mark is there enough electricity for the Tesla Semi? Why does this come up? Well, it turns out that the Semi actually is said to use the equivalent of what 3,000 homes would use when it comes to electricity. And so why is this a big deal? Well, the answer is that if you have a number of these trucks at a production facility or a delivery facility, how do you charge them up? And would you potentially damage the grid in doing so? So this is a question that's kind of lurking, and therefore a question mark about the viability of an electric Semi. So the follow-on question that came up for this was, let's say Tesla decided to put up, or the way this follow-on question arrives is Elon Musk has made the statement that if you have 100 square miles of solar panels, those panels would be sufficient to produce enough electricity to power the United States without the use of oil to produce electricity. So why this is important is that that's a lot of solar panels that are needed to produce that electricity if you're truly going to be producing green energy. So why I believe this is an interesting dialogue is kind of what is going to happen when all these trucks have to be charged, and how do you deal with that electricity, those electricity needs? So the answer is very interesting. So what I thought might happen is that we would have solar farms set up by Tesla across the southern United States where the most sunlight hits. And then what happens is that as you have all these solar farms, if you will, operating, it would be a very simple matter then. By the way, I can see all you saying hello. We'll, from my friends in Sweden and Chile, we'll be chatting with you hello at the end so that we don't interrupt the flow of the conversation. So what's fascinating here is the question of, let's say you produce, I'm in Washington, D.C. If you produce solar energy in Texas or that area where there's a lot of sunshine, how can you get that electricity 1,500 miles from Texas to D.C. so it can be used by the trucks? And the answer is you can actually do it in 1 second flat. And the question is why? So the answer is that it turns out that many of the utilities have swap agreements where what they do is that electricity might be produced in one place, but they simply swap electricity from one place to another in the country, and there's no money that changes hands, so it can be as little as an instant transfer of this electricity. And I was blown away, impressed that was possible to do that. And so it answers the question, is it possible for Tesla to set up in high intensity electric areas with a lot of hours of sunlight each year and have the power used in colder climates in the north where they don't have this sunlight? And so I just thought this was a really fascinating circumstance. And by the way, we could really use your likes to help us trend in terms of where we're at on the list. So we'd really appreciate it if you take time to hit the like button if you like what our commentary was about today, as well as the other elements of subscribing, etc. So I was impressed, stunned. I met with an executive from something called the Southern Company, and she said that, yeah, I mean, the, they have the ability to grow the production of solar energy as is needed to address any needs that pop up. And if there's a heavy use move in the form of trucks, etc., it's very easy to transition energy from one place to the other based on how these swap agreements work between the utilities. So this answers a burning question I had had about how one gets that electricity from the sunny areas to areas that don't have as much sun. And it's a very simple thing to do. So you can move large amounts of power long distances without much of an issue, which I think is an interesting phenomenon. So there won't be any shortages associated with the semis because, for example, Walmart's a big customer and they have spread out distribution locations or distribution hubs, and there'll be no problem to get them the electricity they need to power up those trucks and have them on the road. The second thing we're covering today is that Goldman Sachs came out with a note that Tesla is going to need a total of $10 billion by 2020, and therefore it sort of puts another bogey out there of the cash develop or generation challenges that Tesla might have as they try to make the run towards success and solvency. So when they came up with that $10 billion number, I was like, wow, that's really, it's a good number. It sounds good. By 2020, interesting time location for when it's needed, etc. What I'm fascinated by with Tesla is there's a huge amount of opportunity that's lurking. Supposedly, the current Gigafactory, after it's built out in 2020, will have the capacity to produce 1 million cars a year's worth of batteries. So if that's the number for one Gigafactory, Elon Musk was saying 3 or 4 Gigafactories would be about what he thought Tesla needed to go around the world. Um, and so what I'm kind of shocked by with the announcement of $10 billion is there's this whole thing with Tesla that they're stair stepping. First, they had to do the initial Roadster, and then the Model S, and then the Model X. And so, as you have resources and proof of concept for each of those, the amount of money being put in play for the next stage of Tesla becomes larger. So, Goldman did put out that $10 billion number. But when you look at everything on Tesla's table, probably in the next 15 years, I think the number is between 30 and $40 billion. And whether it's sooner or later, really depends on, do investors feel comfortable with the direction of the company and the quality of execution that's occurred. But I just think that the number that we're talking about at $10 billion kind of sounds realistic, but that number actually could be low. Now, this is random, but if you did, let's say, $60,000 a car times a 5,000 car a week production rate, that's actually $500 million. So, so basically that's $2 billion a month. So a $10 billion number being tossed around, I don't think is too high, but it's possible it could be way too low if in fact the quality of what Tesla is doing is great. The capital markets will be very comfortable in supporting Tesla's agenda by providing a whole bunch more cash to get after initiatives that they're going after. By the way, the other thing that's lurking right now, and I thought was really interesting relative to the Model 3, is the fact that Tesla currently is a $60,000 car without going to the performance model, which now is probably going to be about 70 or 75,000 with all the elements of what the performance model requires because they're going to four-wheel drive, etc. So it's even a higher price point that Tesla enters with these sort of advanced features. The final thing I wanted to dive into today, kind of focuses on the fact that, we're all waiting for word on what's going to happen with the Model 3 ramp. And then once that ramp is completed, what are the implications of that when it comes to, profitability of the firm, etc. And so there's a whole play around with numbers that are going on. Is Tesla at a break even at 5,000 units? Is it 6,000? there's another question mark that lurks, which is Tesla stated that they needed um, about a year, about I want to say 50 to 80,000 cars of production from the Model 3 to get to scale, and then from there they would make money. Let's put it this way: producing a lot of cars takes care of a lot of question marks. The final item that I put into sort of show discussion for today was what's going on at Daimler Benz is always something, or Mercedes is something we're keeping an eye on. And I read an interesting article that stated that Daimler Benz has a fascinating circumstance where they decided to switch their smart cars, which are under their Mercedes brand, over to full electric from gasoline engines or hybrids. And so, what we learned here that I was kind of shocked by is that of the 85 Daimler Benz Mercedes dealerships in the United States, only 27 of the 85 have agreed to make the switch to all electric for the smart car. Um, so, I um, I was fascinated by the fact that I thought that the dealers were forced to take whatever Daimler was delivering, but a $28,000 all electric is something that the dealers are not interested in if they're out of areas like California, where there's mandates related to electric vehicles that make ownership actually preferable. So I just was stunned because it seemed obvious that all of the big companies would jump into the EV space and go after Tesla aggressively. But it turns out that there are actually dealers that are not thrilled with the prospect of electricity, especially if it's a short range vehicle. And then the finish on to all of this is that you now have dealerships saying we're not carrying it. And that puts into mind question marks of, well, what happens when we deliver sort of regular sized Daimler or Mercedes cars that are electrics but with short ranges? Might those dealerships choose to carry them or not? In the case of Tesla, Tesla's dealerships carry everything that they produce, and obviously they're in demand, so there's no shortage of interest in buying. One would think then that the dealers who've chose to not carry these cars are not seeing the kind of demand that makes them confident they can make money off of them. And it also might be the case that the smart vehicles aren't selling very well either. Um, I was also kind of surprised to learn that Daimler had chosen to introduce the all-electric fleet in the United States before doing so in Europe, and that kind of, in my mind, kind of makes no sense because in Europe, spaces are smaller. There's a lot more of a mandate for electricity based on the cost of fuel. There are all these benefits to a European rollout rather than doing this in the United States. And I thought that was interesting that Daimler chose to do that. It also sort of brings up the question, are the unions really powerful in impacting what Tesla's doing? And part of the process is to slow the sort of introduction of the EVs uh, into that space. But it just seems strange. Um, I, well, I'm sort of rooting for Daimler, even though I'm a Tesla fan. Um, you know, basically because the more players in the EV market, the more options we all have for great vehicles that can add to the success in addressing the climate change issues related to EVs. So I just think that I found this news on what was going on with the Daimler folks to be kind of weird, interesting, strange. But one would think once they go to full-size vehicles with 200 to 300 miles of range, it'll be no problem to get the dealers to carry it because you'll have customers that are interested in those longer versions of vehicles. Um, so, typically we roll, in the 15 to 20 minute zone for our shows. Just a reminder, our next show will be Sunday, targeting 7 a.m., but likely about 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We also appreciate you guys taking time out. I can see my friend from Australia, Peter, and our friends from Sweden and Chile saying hello. We appreciate your taking time out to visit with us. Wanted to also reminder that please, we could use your help on Patreon if possible. Also note taking 5 to 10 seconds to watch a couple of the ads that are on is also a support to the channel that is appreciated. And we could definitely use your like because it affects the ranking of the video and whether or not we get enough viewers to sort of justify shooting the show. So do take time to like if possible. Uh, Greetings from Albuquerque. Thanks, Aaron, for taking time out to meet with us. Um, at any rate, please share your questions, inquiries, comments on anything that we've produced. Again, as far as the Southern Company is concerned, more consumption of electricity just means more business for them. And it's no problem to produce electricity and move it very long distances very quickly if needed. And then Goldman Sachs is right. Tesla might need $10 billion. Interestingly, they might be producing, $3 billion of revenue a month. So 10 billion relative to the larger numbers of what they're doing is kind of low. I actually think the Tesla spending plan is far larger than that, but it'll have to be justified by profitability on each stage to make that all work. At any rate, this is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Tschüss, German, Max gut, also German. Au revoir, French. Favel, a new goodbye in Dutch, or favel. Um, Adios, Lahitrot, Hebrew, Hoda Hafez, Farsi. Enough respect, walk good to my Jamaican friend in Sweden as well. And I'm going to take you guys out with another view here of the beautiful gardens in a place called Potomac, Maryland. 7 Locks Road is what it's called. And look forward to any and all comments once again.